Folks, welcome to the program. This, of course, is Stinchfield, the podcast. So, lots happened since the, confrontation of Zelensky inside the Oval Office. We got a lot going on to talk about because Zelensky made a very big mistake. But I think what I want to do on this podcast today is spend some time about how we got to this point. I have never been a fan of this war in Ukraine. I have never been a fan of Zelensky. Not that I'm a fan of Putin by any means, but I'll tell you, this whole thing was a grift, and it was a grift from the start. And I think what we saw in the White House on Friday was Zelensky continuing his grift. And so now we've got indications of what led up to, call it the blowout in the Oval Office, where President Trump and J.D. Vance said, enough is enough. We're not taking this anymore from you. 45 minutes of Zelensky demanding security guarantees, refusing to engage in a ceasefire, talking about wanting boots on the ground in Ukraine. All of these things that were going to be unacceptable to President Trump and the American people, all the while refusing to acknowledge that this deal, putting American engineers and miners and executives on the ground in Ukraine, would have been the best security guarantee Zelensky could have gotten. And he didn't realize it. So Zelensky gets kicked out of the White House. I'll go through some of the interaction. But before we do that, I'm going to play behind the scenes from Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, who was there. And then, was the United States being played by Great Britain? Remember, Zelensky leaves the White House. He goes straight to England, where he meets with the Prime Minister. And apparently, according to my buddy Tony Schaefer, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, he had a deal inked on January 17th with Britain to put boots on the ground, to share in the rare earth minerals. Did the United States know about this deal? You can't have two deals. So again, nothing looks above board when it comes to Vladimir Zelensky and Ukraine, one of, if not the most corrupt nation in the world. So these are the things we're going to go through today. Before we get to it, though, I want you to think about taking a portion of your 401k or IRA and making it a precious metals IRA. It is imperative that you protect your portfolio with precious metals. Not all of it, but some of it. How much is right for you? You need to talk to my friend over at Colonial Metals Group. They are great. They've helped so many of my viewers, Rumble viewers, secure their finances with gold and silver. So here's what you do. It's really simple. Go to freegoldguide.com/grant, freegoldguide.com/grant. You can call them at 800-458-7356 or just hit the QR code on your screen there. But with everything going on internationally right now, gold has stood the test of time as a hedge against all of this chaos. Gold's not going anywhere. We have $36 trillion in debt. You think that's going anywhere anytime soon? No. So I believe gold will continue to go up. I believe it is a safe haven because it has been since literally the beginning of time. So again, freegoldguide.com/grant. That's where I'd love for you to go. Secure those finances. Do it today. All right. Let's take a listen to Howard Lutnick explaining what went on before the blow up, and then we'll play the blow up for you. Okay? I don't even know if it's fair to call it a blow up. A scolding. Then we'll play the scolding for you.
Well, Secretary, you were sitting across from the president on Friday. Before we get to tariffs, I want to get your reaction to what went down. How was it in the room? And do you believe Democrats were egging on Zelensky to not say thank you, to stay tough and not sign that rare earth minerals deal?
No, so we were 40 minutes before the cameras came in and 45 minutes before the meltdown. And the fact was Zelensky never stopped asking for, I will give no concessions. They've got to leave my land. I want reparations of $300 billion. And I want the United States to give me security guarantees while they're at war with Russia. And that's why the president called it World War III. You're gambling with World War III. We're not going to give you security guarantees while you're at war with Russia. It's just ridiculous. His requests were ridiculous. They were not reasonable. The president let it go for a while, he was there to make peace. Our president is there to make peace, as he said, end the death and Zelensky was not there to make peace. He was there to strike some sort of make-believe bargain that he had in his mind, and eventually that just ran its course, and Donald Trump said, I can't take this nonsense anymore, and made it crystal clear he's the peacemaker, and if Zelensky's not interested in peace, then he should go home and think about it.
And
that's what Zelensky did. He basically got kicked out of the White House. So think about this. You're trying to cut a deal for what would amount to security, because if you're moving American miners and executives and engineers into Ukraine, Russia's not going to screw with them. So you've got a virtual security guarantee there now that you have American involvement. Vladimir Putin doesn't want to cross America, just as we really don't want to be tussling with Russia either. Russia can do us harm. Vladimir Zelensky can't. This is why when President Trump says we hold the cards, we do. We hold all of them. Zelensky doesn't have anything we need. The rare earth minerals, sure, we could actually end up going and getting them from Russia. And that's what Russia said. Hey, come make a deal with us. In the end, you know what I think President Trump does? I think he ends up making a deal with both of them, saying, hey, we'll come get the rare earth minerals from you. But NATO's not going to happen. And there's a NATO play in all of this that Ukraine wants in. Russia wants to make sure that Ukraine is out of NATO. There is some land repercussions here that Russia certainly wants access to the Black Sea. That's what Crimea was about. But the mainstream media doesn't talk about that. They just talk about, Vladimir Putin on the march taking land because he wants it. No, this was about security for his country. Now, agree or disagree with going into a sovereign nation, I just want you to understand the reasoning behind Vladimir Putin and him doing what he did. Here, I'll play a little more of Lutnick, and then we'll play the interaction, and then we'll go through some of the history of Ukraine and how we got to this point.
that's what happened. He was asked to leave. I don't know exactly the language President Trump used, but he said, get the heck out of here. Do you think that Zelensky had met with Democrats before meeting with Trump, and basically they told him, stay firm, don't give in to anything, don't do the rare earth minerals deal?
I can't imagine that. I hope not. I mean, that would be dreadful. So the fact is the president just wants to make peace. He tried to make peace. We had a beautiful lunch arranged. We had a signing, tables all set up. This was designed to be beautiful, right? And instead we had lunch by ourselves without the Zelensky crowd there, because they just did not come for peace. And our president's there, as he said, to end the death and to create peace. And that's who Donald Trump is, and he knows how to do it. He even said, you have to be reasonable to Putin. You can't say, Putin's a terrorist and then call the guy up and try to make peace with him. So you have to play balanced. Donald Trump knows how to be mediator. He knows how to arbitrate this, and he needs Zelensky on side, and Zelensky needed to hear it directly from the funding mouth of the United States of America. We're not going to give you money unless you're here for peace.
So, you know what the funniest thing of all this was? Zelensky is kicked out of the White House because he was totally disrespectful. They've got this giant lunch set up, and no one eats. So they invited, from what I'm told, they invited the White House staffers in to eat the Ukrainians' lunch. And really, that's what J.D. Vance and Donald Trump did. They ate the lunch of Zelensky in the Oval Office. I'll play some of it because I think it's classic. I think Donald Trump and J.D. Vance may be WWE Tag Team World Wrestling Champions here, okay? Because the way Donald Trump allowed J.D. Vance to make the case for America, and then only when Zelensky started to get too out of line did Donald Trump jump in and put the final body slam in place.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are
Mr.
not
President,
strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, Everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future.
Oh boy, here we go. Do not tell the president and vice president of the United States of America what they will or will not feel. Okay, this was where he goes down the road of making a very big mistake.
God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't know
God
that.
bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on
position
this
to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this.
what
I'm not
You're in
dictating.
no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're
will-
going to feel very
you will
good.
Feel influenced.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
you will-
See, this is where Zelensky needed to just shut his trap. Once he sees he's pissed off the man who has all the purse strings, the man who has all the power, the man who has the connection to the man who's invaded his country, now once you've ticked him off, you've got to just be quiet and let President Trump talk, but he didn't. This is where he's in way over his head.
feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the
bad
very
position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From
it.
the very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a good
Brown,
position.
I
You don't
was
have
in
the cards right now. With us, you start
I'm
having
not playing
cards. But
cards.
right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're gambling
I'm the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War III.
what do you
You're
think about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And
You-
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
I'm-
It's
with
back
all
to
respect to
you.
your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
I'm very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once?
A lot of times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you.
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for
What-
the United
what
States
you're
of
speaking
America
about?
and the president who's trying to save your country.
What are you speaking about? He says. What are you speaking about? You went and campaigned with Joe Biden. All right, so come in there. And J.D. Vance said, have you said thank you once in this meeting? All right, so the left went crazy. Oh, he said thank you a million times. First off, he hasn't really meant thank you the times he said it. But has he had said thank you in that meeting? No, he didn't say thank you. So Zelensky got everything he deserved. I believe President Trump was as strong a president I've ever seen in my life. I've never been more proud of a president, going back to the days of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump are the every time Ronald Reagan does something, then President Trump has something. I'll give you the example of this. When I was a kid, I'll never forget, I came home from school and Ronald Reagan had just been shot, and I turned on the TV and I'm watching this over and over again. Ronald Reagan waving, getting shot under his arm, getting pushed in a limo, and I'd never been so proud of my president, praying that he's alive, and Ronald Reagan being so tough and coming back and being just an amazing president. What happens with Donald Trump? Gets shot nearly straight through the temple by a centimeter, gets his ear shot off, and President Trump, what? Stands up, fight, fight, fight. Very Reagan-esque. Then you've got President Reagan, tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Then you've got President Trump in with Zelensky saying, you don't tell us how to feel. You don't have the cards. This is what leadership is about. Now, I think there is something else at play. I think that there's a good chance we may have gotten played. And I think Great Britain may have played the United States. I say that, but I think maybe Donald Trump had a tip off of this. Maybe he knew something was amiss. But I'm going to play for you a clip from Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who was on my Real America's Voice show on Friday. Over the weekend, he goes on Newsmax with some blockbuster information about Great Britain's role in all of this. So let's talk about that in just a second. But before we do, folks, you've heard of my friends over at get20now.com. This is about getting 20% annualized interest on your investment paid monthly. I tell you, it's like cash flow. It's mailbox money, only it's direct deposited electronically into your bank account. 20% annualized on your investment paid monthly. You cannot beat this. How do they do it? Well, they do it with Bitcoin mining. And these are the warehouses that I'm talking about. Big, giant, industrialized warehouses. They buy the electricity super, super cheap. And they mine Bitcoin, sell it on the open market the next day. Your investment goes towards that, but you're not investing in Bitcoin. You're simply investing in the operation itself. And so they pay you 20%, up to 20%, depending on the deal you cut. and you get paid monthly. Folks, I'm loving this deal. So many of Stinchfield's Army members are loving this deal. I get DMs all the time. Hey, is this legit? I have invested a sizable chunk of cash with them, and they've lived up to their promises for me, straightforward. And I've been doing this for 5-6 months. Again, I've invested a sizable amount of cash. They've lived up to their promises. I've now gotten to know these gentlemen personally, and I feel like they're the real deal. And they've been great with me. So, again, get20now.com. Very popular investment. Up to 20% monthly income. Paid monthly, annualized. All right? Pay them a visit. You're not going to regret it. All right? All right. So, as we move forward to my buddy, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, who was on Newsmax, and he blew the whistle on Great Britain. I want you to listen to this.
Well, first off, they've got to change the fact that on the 17th of January, the British signed an agreement with Ukraine to have exclusive rights to those deals. Kershaw, this is a battle of dueling narratives. You can go check it out. This is on the British-UK website. It talks about this 100-year Ukraine and UK signed a 100-year deal over security guarantees and economic development. So what happened is that I believe President Trump and his team found out that they were being played. So this has become a set of dueling narratives. The BBC just said today there's massive protests here. Zach Andrews just said all the European leaders are behind Zelensky. We are being played. We, the United States, are trying to be signed up to a deal that we provide security guarantees to a economic development deal that Keir Starmer has already signed them up to do.
So you hear this? Ukraine signed a deal on January 17th with Great Britain for Britain to provide security, boots on the ground for an economic deal. Now, hold on a second, Zelensky, you corrupt mother scratcher. You can't sign a deal for mineral rights with two countries. It's like dating two girls at the same time. It's never going to work, and it's going to end really, really badly. So Zelensky gets busted signing this deal with Great Britain. And how dare Great Britain not come forward to the United States when they're talking about this deal? Why didn't Great Britain call up Donald Trump, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and say, Mr. President, we already have a deal. I don't know what you're entering. We would entertain you coming on in with us, but there's already a deal in place. Great Britain didn't do that. I'm worried with Great Britain's move to the left that we do not have a friend in England that we once had. And that is really, really a shame. So thank God Tony Shaffer blew the whistle on this. I would assume, as Tony did, that the Trump administration knew about this. If they didn't, that's an even bigger problem. Now, in the YouTube chat, Sunny Smile writes, Zelensky doesn't want the war to end because he can no longer keep martial law instituted. Zelensky will be out of a job. I think that's very true. I also think there's a money play. Zelensky says he doesn't know where half the money is. I'm sure he and other Ukrainian oligarchs have taken it. And I'm not convinced that some money hasn't filtered back to Putin. It may be in Putin's bench. Could you imagine if Putin and Zelensky were in on this all together and they're all getting rich off Americans? What a disaster that would be if that was the case. So Tony Shaffer with blockbuster news, really blockbuster news.
So the first thing it has to do is people have to take a step back and be honest with what's really going on. And so I think what happened here, I don't know the details. It wasn't in that meeting. But Kershaw, the president was trying to play a straight line deal to sign an agreement with them over this mineral rights deal, knowing full well that the British had already signed on this 3 days before his inauguration. So where we go from here is both sides, if this is going to work, if the Europeans really want our help, they're going to have to take a step back and start being honest with the United States about what's really going on.
Yeah, I don't think Europe has been honest. The European Union, even in many respects, NATO, they hate America. They hate us because of our success. It's the old jealous deal. So they hate us because of our success. They hate the idea of sovereignty. They hate the idea of individual liberty. Sadly, because not every European country was like that. Now, Italy is making a change. You know, I'm half Italian. I love that Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, she's really doing a great job. That country is slowly changing. But when you think about what Zelensky could have done here, it was a simple game, man. Scott Jennings summed it up.
He needs Zelensky to recognize the position that he's in.
Which to you is what?
We're their patron. We're their best hope for the killing to stop and for them to emerge from this sovereign and prosperous. And we're also their best hope as a business partner. I mean, all Zelensky had to do today was put on a tie, show up, smile, say thank you, sign the papers, and have lunch. That's it. And he couldn't do that. And this followed 10 days of being difficult in private and now 1 day of being stupid in public. This did not have to go down this way.
Okay.
And however you feel about why it started, why it's going on, who's right and who's wrong, we can help them in this and come out okay on the other side, and he's making it hard.
Let me make this very, very clear to all of you out there. America is in a winning position right now with President Trump at the helm, no matter what comes out of this now. America's victorious. We now have a way out of Ukraine. Zelensky handed us that with his performance in the Oval Office. We don't have to provide any more money to Ukraine now. And if we go down that road, then what happens? Europe's going to have to step up. And you know what? It's Europe's problem, not our problem. We wipe our hands of it, which is really what I wanted to do from the very start. Now, the other side of this is Zelensky comes back, hat in hand, and says, oh, Mr. President, I am very sorry, Mr. President. I should not have disrespected you in the Oval Office. And Zelensky then makes a deal. And we prosper with these rare earth minerals. The war stops. We make a deal with Russia to mine things in Russia as well, or at least buy some of these things that we need, including aluminum from Russia, lift some sanctions there, and everybody lives happily. But everybody can't live happily. If NATO expands onto Russia's borders and they start putting missiles in silos along the Russian-Ukrainian border or Georgia, it's not going to work. Now, the fact is it's not 1987. We don't need missiles on the border of Russia. We have nuclear submarines that can park off the coast of Russia, and we could launch nuclear missiles into Russia just as easily, sea-based versus land-based. So, but it's the optics of it. Just as if Russia made a deal with Canada to put nuclear weapons on our border or in Mexico, we'd say, not happening. Well, Russia's doing the same thing here. So again, as Scott Jennings says, Vladimir Zelensky could have smiled, signed the deal, said, thank you, Mr. President, ate lunch, and left. And I wouldn't be talking about this today. I'd be talking about something else, but he didn't do that. He really didn't. In the Rumble chat, Craig Muttley writes, Grant, don't forget to cover the brand new Epstein files release. Oopsie, never mind. Good one. I do have something on Epstein. Pam Bondi was on with Mark Levin. I'm going to play some clips of that a little bit later in this program. So stand by for that. I do still want to go through the history of some of this. Before we get to the history of some of this, I want you to think back to basically 4 years ago when this war started, 3-4 years ago. And you had a battle between people like myself. I call myself a grassroots MAGA conservative, an America First MAGA conservative. And you had people like Lindsey Graham, who's a neocon, loves the expansion of war, defense contractors profit, and all of their globalist cronies make lots of money. And I think that's a lot of what Ukraine was about. Things have shifted. Remember, I got in a lot of trouble at Newsmax for simply saying that I wanted checks and balances on the money. They wanted me to be hell-bent on Ukraine, and I just couldn't do it. Well, I feel in some respects vindicated now as I watch not just Newsmax somewhat turn on them, but other friends of mine that were very pro-Zelensky, even selling Zelensky merchandise at some point, now saying, you know what, enough is enough. It's almost a vindication. Just, Grant, 4 years ago, you were right. You were one of the few early on saying, this smells fishy. Well, now even neocon Lindsey Graham, guess what? He's now done too.
So, what I think, complete, utter disaster. I've been to Ukraine. 8 or 9 times since the war started. I understand the consequences of Putin's actions against Ukraine. I appreciate what the Ukrainian people have done. They fought like tigers. At the end of the day, I was hoping that this minerals deal, which would be transformative in the relationship, would go over well. I talked to Zelensky this morning. Don't take the bait. President Trump was in a very good mood last night. Somebody asked me, am I embarrassed about Trump? I have never been more proud of the president. I was very proud of J.D. Vance, standing up for our country. We want to be helpful. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelensky again. I think most Americans saw a guy that they would not want to go in business with. The way he handled the meeting, the way he confronted the president was just over the top. So I think the relationship between Ukraine and America is important, vitally important. But can Zelensky do a deal with the United States? After what I saw, I don't know.
What would he need to do, sir? Senator Graham.
You just had lunch with President Trump. What did he say to you about his interactions and whether he thinks
he was shocked? He was very upbeat. I told Zelensky, we'll talk about security guarantees. We'll talk about ceasefires and how the war ends. This is a process. You have a new relationship with America, a $500 billion, $500 billion deal that President Trump is proud of, that gives us an interest worth defending. Let's talk about the positive. But he was terrible at Munich, Zelensky, and I think he has made it almost impossible to sell to the American people that he's a good investment, that he is a good business.
He's not a good investment. You know, as Craig Butley in the Rumble chat says, he wants, oh no, it was Sunny Smile. He's got martial law in place right now. He's postponed elections indefinitely. I get that it's really hard to have an election in your country when your country's occupied, but at some point, you've got to figure out a system. Because right now, Zelensky is acting like a dictator. He was so hell-bent on no ceasefire. How do you have no ceasefire and want to make a deal with Russia? So you're going to make a deal but still be fighting? That, to me, just shows me that Zelensky is somewhat dumb, really. And I don't know how else to explain it, but the fact that I think he is dumb. Let's get into the history of Ukraine. RFK Jr. did a sit down. It was before this, but it really lays out what's behind Ukraine and why we got to this point and what Russia really wanted by going in. And, you know, there's some indications that when Russia went in the first 7 days, his whole goal was to force Zelensky into saying, okay, I'll remain neutral, no NATO, get out of my country, let's agree to that. And Zelensky wouldn't agree. He wouldn't agree. I believe Zelensky wanted this war. I really do, and I think there are many in Europe. There are many in the United States. Joe Biden, Barack Obama at the top of the list that wanted this war. So let's listen to RFK Jr. here in a moment, but before we get to that, I want to tell you about my friends over at Patriot Mobile. They provide the service for my cell phone. I love them. America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They put the money where their mouth is, all right? You know that a portion of your cell phone bill will go to funding conservative causes. Every conservative event I'm at, Patriot Mobile is there as a sponsor, meaning they're enabling the voice to move forward. My voice, for one, they support me here on the radio show, on the Real America's Voice show. So many of my conservative friends are supported by Patriot Mobile. It allows us to push this message far and wide. So I ask you respectfully, make the switch today. You get to choose what network you want to be on, which is why their performance guarantee is like no others. If you don't like the AT&T network, just switch to Verizon. But all you have to do is call Patriot Mobile to do that. Okay? And you're going to get great customer service because it's all 100% U.S. based. So here's what you do. Go to patriotmobile.com/grant, patriotmobile.com/grant, or call them at 972-PATRIOT, 972-PATRIOT. Use the promo code GRANT for a free month service. You tell them Grant Stinchfield sent you. All right. RFK Jr. on how we got here.
Putin every day says, I want to settle the war, let's negotiate. And Zelensky has said, we're not going to negotiate. But Zelensky didn't start that way. I don't want to, belabor the history, but Russia was invaded 3 times through Ukraine. The last time Hitler killed 1 out of every 7 Russians. They don't want to have Ukraine join NATO. So when the wall came down in the Soviet Union, Europe, Gorbachev destroyed himself politically by doing something that was very, very courageous. He went to Bush and he said, I'm going to allow you to reunify Germany under a NATO army. I'm going to remove 450,000 Soviet troops, but I want your commitment. After that, you will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. And we solemnly swore we wouldn't do it. Well, then in 97, President Zelensky was the first in the neocon said, we're going to move NATO 1,000 miles to the east and take 15 countries into it and surround the Soviet Union. So then we not only move it into 14 new nations, but we unilaterally walk away from our 2 nuclear weapons treaties with the Russians. And we put Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland 12 minutes from Moscow. When Russians did that to Cuba in '62, we came this close to nuclear war until they removed them. So the Russians don't want nukes 400 miles from Moscow. We then overthrow the Ukraine government. In 2014, their elected government, and put in a Western sympathetic government. Russia then has to go into Crimea because they have a port. It's their only warm water port. And they know the new government that we just installed is going to invite the U.S. Navy into their port. So Russia then went into Crimea without firing a shot, because the people of Crimea are Russian. Then the new Ukrainian government we installed started killing ethnic Russians in Donbass and Lugansk, and they voted to leave and join Russia. Putin said, I don't want them. Let's give them protection and give them semi-autonomy and make an agreement to keep NATO out of Ukraine. That treaty was written by Germany, France, Russia, and England, the Minsk Accords. And the Ukrainian parliament, which is controlled by ultra-rightists, and that's a nice way of talking about them, refused to sign it. Zelensky runs in 2019. He's an actor. Why did he get elected with 70% of the vote? Because he promised to sign the Minsk Accords. He promised peace. He gets in there and he pivots. Nobody can explain why, but we know why. Because he was threatened with death by ultra-rightists in his government and a withdrawal of support by the United States by Victoria Nuland, who's the leading neocon in the State Department. We told him he could not sign it. So then the Russians go in. They don't send a big army. They only send 40,000 people. It's a nation of 44 million people. They clearly do not intend to conquer Ukraine. But they want us back at the negotiating table. We won't allow Zelensky to go back. So he goes to Israel and Turkey and says, will you please help me negotiate a treaty? The Russians just want a guarantee that Ukraine won't join NATO. Zelensky signs the treaty. Putin's people sign the treaty. And Putin starts withdrawing the Russian troops in good faith. And what happens? Joe Biden sends Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, over to Ukraine in April and forces him to tear up the treaty. And since then, 450,000 kids have died who none of them should have died. For every one Russian that dies, 5 to 8 Ukrainians die, and they don't have any men left. You know, we're giving them all these weapons, but they don't have men left. It's a catastrophe, and we look kind of like the aggressor. That's the way the rest of the world sees it.
So, you hear that story on the mainstream media? Do you believe RFK Jr.? I've actually gone back and looked at all of it, and he's spot on. His timeline is spot on all of it. This Victoria Nuland, who was the Assistant Secretary of State under Barack Obama, then is in the Biden State Department as well. All of this is orchestrated for one reason and one reason only. I believe it's money, and I believe it is to push this, quote, one world order, that they want NATO, just like the United Nations, to grow and grow and grow and take it all in to the point where we lose American sovereignty, and there is this one world globalist community. And Ukraine is at the center of it all because Russia needs that port. Can you imagine a naval base going into Crimea? I didn't know that. I've been doing this a long time. I didn't know they were going to put a naval base down there. Of course, Russia didn't want that. That's their only access to the Black Sea. So they need that port. So Russia goes in, takes Crimea, not a shot fired. Nothing really happens. Nothing. So as you can see, this is all orchestrated by the Obama-Biden regime. And that's what I call it, the Obama-Biden regime, because that's who is behind it all. Now, there's another gentleman who also spells out what happened. And this is fascinating, too, to listen to him talk about how this all went down.
What was Putin's intention in the war? Not the propaganda that's written about this. Oh, that they failed and he was going to take over Ukraine. The idea was to keep NATO, and what is NATO? It's the United States, off of Russia's border. No more, no less. When the Soviet Union ended in 1991, and an agreement was made that NATO will not move 1 inch eastward. Now, what happened after 1991, the United States decided there would be no end to eastward enlargement of NATO. And the decision was taken formally in 1994, when President Clinton signed off on NATO enlargement to the east, all the way to Ukraine and into Georgia. So the NATO enlargement, as you know, started in 1999 with Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic. And Russia was extremely unhappy about it, but these were countries still far from the border. So the next round of NATO enlargement came in 2004. With the 3 Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, and Slovakia. At this point, Russia was pretty damn upset. So as everybody recalls, in 2007, President Putin said, stop, enough. And of course, what that meant was in 2008, the United States jammed down Europe's throat enlargement of NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia. This is right up against Russia. And Russia protested because if Russia decided to have a military base on the Rio Grande or the Canadian border, not only would the United States freak out, we'd have war within about 10 minutes. And a month later, a war broke out. That gets Georgia destroyed. And starting in 2010, the U.S. put in Aegis missile systems in Poland and then in Romania. And Russia doesn't like that. In 2010, Viktor Yanukovych was elected on the platform of neutrality. Russia had no territorial interests or designs in Ukraine at all. What Russia was negotiating was a 25-year lease for Sevastopol naval base. That's it. Not for Crimea, not for the Donbass, nothing. In 2014, the U.S. worked actively to overthrow Yanukovych. Everybody knows the phone call by my Columbia University colleague, Victoria Nuland, and the U.S. Ambassador Peter Piot. Listen to it. It's fascinating.
I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea. I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience, and, fuck the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make...
You don't get better evidence. Then came Minsk, and especially Minsk II. It said there should be autonomy for the Russian-speaking regions in the east of Ukraine. It was supported unanimously by the UN Security Council. The United States and Ukraine decided it was not to be enforced. There were many thousands of deaths in the shelling by Ukraine in the Donbass. And one of the issues on the table in December 2021, January 2022, was, does the United States claim the right to put missile systems in Ukraine? And Blinken told Lavrov in January 2022, the United States reserves the right to put missile systems wherever it wants. So the war started. What was Putin's intention in the war? It was to force Zelensky to negotiate neutrality. And that happened within 7 days of the start of the invasion. Ukraine walked away unilaterally from a near agreement. Why? Because the United States told them to. The idea was that there would be Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia that would deprive Russia of any international status by blocking the Black Sea. And the American senators, who are as nasty and cynical and corrupt as imaginable, say this is wonderful expenditure of our money because no Americans are dying. It's the pure proxy war. And since the U.S. talked the negotiators away from the table, about 1 million Ukrainians have died or been severely
injured. So the Biden administration talks Zelensky away from a negotiating table 7 days after the war started. And in the end, the American taxpayer is now given $300 billion. 1 million Ukrainian lives have been lost. Who knows how many Soviet lives have been lost? All for what? Nothing. To get us back to the same point where we were when we started. All because Russia does not want U.S. bases, U.S. missile systems on its borders. Now, for Antony Blinken to go tell Lavrov, who is Putin's, Putin's guy dealing with the national leaders, international leaders, that America reserves the right to put missiles wherever we want. Well, that is true. But you don't say that to Russia. You don't tell Russia, I'm going to put missiles there. You change the subject. We know we reserve the right to put missiles wherever we want. But you don't need to shove it in Russia's face. Russia, understand, they're not as strong as the United States is, but they're pretty damn strong. That is not somebody you want to thumb your nose at or make feel inferior to you. And we know how Russia feels about feeling inferior. They don't like it. So that's another fascinating assessment, which really backs up everything JFK was saying, which is why I played it for you. Now, here's the thing. Zelensky could have come in and said, thank you. You guys are great. I appreciate the security agreement. Now get with Russia. Tell them to stop the killing. We'll agree to a ceasefire. Everybody goes home happy and well fed. No. Zelensky causes problems. Unlike a guy like Benjamin Netanyahu, who took the exact opposite tone this weekend of Zelensky. See, Benjamin Netanyahu is a brilliant political negotiator. He knows how to navigate the world stage. He knows that the best way to stay safe is to suck up to the big dog. And yes, that's President Trump in America. So that's what he does.
I want to thank President Trump for his unwavering support for Israel. During my recent visit to Washington, I said that Donald Trump is the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House. And President Trump shows that friendship each and every day. He has shown it through his visionary plan for Gaza. This is a plan which Israel fully supports. He's shown it by sending us all the munitions that were being held up. This way, he's giving Israel the tools we need to finish the job against Iran's terror axis. And he has shown it by fully backing Israel and putting the pressure to release the hostages where it truly belongs, on Hamas. Israel has accepted President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff's plan to extend the temporary ceasefire by 50 days. During that time, we can discuss the conditions for a permanent ceasefire that will end the war in Gaza.
So do you see the difference in how Benjamin Netanyahu is willing to negotiate? We'll do a temporary ceasefire. We'll see how it goes. And if it goes well, then we'll negotiate a permanent ceasefire. Could Zelensky not have said that? Listen, Zelensky, you take a ceasefire. If Russia breaks it, well, then you're back where you started. But if Russia keeps it, then you can talk about negotiating some other form of peace. But bringing America in for financial interest gives you peace. See, Benjamin Netanyahu realizes this. I came up with a great idea. I'm so mad at Ukraine. Why don't we take the Gazans, so-called Palestinians, and move them to Kyiv in Ukraine? We'll just take all of them and put them in Kyiv. See how that works out for Vladimir Zelensky. I promise you it's not going to work out very well.
In Witkoff's plan, half of the hostages would be released right away, and the remaining half would be released if we reach an agreement on a permanent ceasefire. Again, Israel has accepted this plan. I accepted this plan. But so far, Hamas has rejected it.
That's because Hamas rejects everything. Hamas doesn't want peace, just as I don't think Zelensky wants peace. So if you believe the two experts that I just played for you, that Vladimir Putin went into Ukraine in what he thought was going to be a 7-day war to force Zelensky to the negotiating table to say no on NATO. For one of the first few times, Putin, made a bad assessment. He was sadly mistaken. Why was he sadly mistaken? Because I think he overestimated the smarts of Zelensky. After watching this, folks, I actually believe Zelensky is just plain dumb. I don't think he's a smart man, and I think he's getting his citizens killed. I see this evidence of Ukrainians being kidnapped in order to serve, that's how they're filling the ranks of the army, is that if you're not showing up for draft, they're kidnapping you on the streets. That is completely unacceptable in my most humble of opinions. Hey, folks, let me tell you about my friends over at, and you know what we're going to do, too, is I want to do body language. I'm going to play the segment from my Real America's Voice show, but we're going to go through the body language with a military interrogator. What does the body language say? J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Trump, Zelensky in that Oval Office meltdown. So we'll play that here in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to tell you about my555challenge.com. That's 3 5s. $5, 5 days, 5 pounds, guaranteed. It's about taking your life back. This is the energized health system. They've got a deal. It starts tonight. So I want you to go to the website right now and say, you know what? Today's the day I'm taking my life back. I'm going to lose 5 pounds this week. You don't have anything to lose but the pounds, okay? You will gain muscle mass along the process. You will gain hydration. Your cholesterol will go down. All these things happen to me, measurable accounts of this happening to me. So my555challenge.com. Go there today. Get with the folks at Energized Health. Start this. You have nothing to lose. Folks, it's some video calls. They're going to introduce you to intercellular hydration. They're going to give you the tips that along this first week is going to get you started on the road to big time health changes in your life. It's about intercellular hydration. If you don't know what that is about, you got to get on this call today. It's going to change your life around. My555challenge.com. I lost 15 pounds in 2 weeks, and I was already in pretty good shape. I've kept it off, and I feel as good as I ever felt, and I just turned 56 last week. My555challenge.com. Go there today. All right, so let's play the body language segment. Now, I'm going to give you a little tip. This happened on Friday night on Real America's Voice. President Trump was landing, so there's a little bit of Air Force One landing. Remember, this is a replay. We were taking some of the video of President Trump landing, but the body language is fascinating with my buddy Greg Hartley. So here's how the segment went down. We have to go through what happened with Zelensky, Trump, and J.D. Vance today. Let's start out with this clip before we get to my buddy Greg Hartley. Roll it.
I don't know. They broke it with Biden because Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt.
All right, so straight to the point. I want to bring in now host of the Behavior Panel on YouTube and former military interrogator, body language and behavior expert, Greg Hartley. Greg, what do you see there? And welcome to the program, my friend.
Hey, Grant, I see absolute endorsement of what Trump says when he says, you know, they ran over Biden, they ran over Obama. You see him going, yeah, a little bit. But then when he says, and they absolutely respect me, you see that chin boss, this part of the chin we call chin boss, shrink back, him raise his brow and go, yeah, that's true. He's saying, yeah, they do respect you, but they didn't respect the other guys. So he agrees with him.
He clearly starts to get annoyed here. Let me play a clip from J.D. Vance where J.D. Vance just lights up Zelensky here.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are not strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come to the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
All right, so I get this one, Greg Hartley. That's a pretty easy one to tell, isn't it?
Well, you know, I always say to people, this is not an absolute, but in this case, it absolutely is an absolute. He is closing him out. There's a couple of things to notice. You see that threat check when he says something about disrespect. You see the quick turn of his head. He's turned away looking at one of the cameras or one of the reporters, and then suddenly sharply turns to catch him. So it's a threat check. He feels cornered here. I think what he came to do was to think he could deliver this message up front of you can't negotiate with the Russians. And then when it didn't go his way, he never recovered from there, because he starts to go down the path of getting into conflict with these guys.
What about J.D. Vance in this? Because he's using his hands a lot, and I think his hands are telling the message here.
Well, if you look, J.D. Vance is still clearly in control of what he's saying, because those are regulators. That's the way you control the conversation. Hold on 1 minute. Make your point by illustrating with your hand. Remember, I tell you there are 5 real pieces of body language. He's using 2. There's a third one. He's using all of these pieces to drive home his point. And you can see Zelensky gets the point. He's not agreeing. See that chin up in defiance. He came to deliver a message. He's not going to get to deliver it.
All right, let's look at President Trump in this same clip. I really was impressed by President Trump by letting JD handle as much as he needed to handle, and then President Trump ultimately jumped in here. But President Trump let JD. He didn't try to be the boss and take over here.
Yeah, until it gets to the point where Trump has had enough, he is pretty calm and pretty contained. You'll see he's pursing his lips a little bit. If you look at, he's got pursed lips. He sticks his lips out like that. That's disapproval, and a little bit of disdain or contempt when they're talking about how bad things have gotten. But he doesn't do anything. He's sitting there with his hands folded, just waiting.
Does the leaning forward and the hands together tell you anything?
Well, that's kind of a Trump position. If you go look back to him being interviewed by Stephanopoulos when he was running for president, he sat exactly that way with his hands down and leaning forward in the chair a little bit. I think it's a comfort position for him.
All right, let's play another. Well, is that right, gentlemen? Maybe help me out. Let's go to cut 4. And we'll play that one.
Everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
That.
You will not have war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this.
I'm not dictating.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
Oh, I just love it, Greg, because we finally have a leader in the Oval Office that ain't going to take you-know-what from anybody, Greg.
Yeah, so what happens here is I think he actually is trying to reach some kind of empathy with people to say, look, you would feel it too, but he doesn't realize that's the wrong thing to say, and then he doesn't know how to read the room and back off of it. You see his hand come up, and he's trying to regulate and control. That's not what I meant, but it doesn't work. He's gotten them irritated by his attempts to now. So by now he's so far down this path that he's got Trump coming after him. And when Trump comes after him, then he feels fight or flight. You can't miss it. If you watch him, you see he starts to get a little wooden. His respiration's up a little bit, and his hands even come loose. Yeah.
You know, a friend of mine said to me today, we were discussing this like everybody was, and he says, you know, he chose not to use an interpreter. It's a dangerous thing to do because though his English seems pretty good, he says the nuances can get in the way. Maybe that got Zelensky in trouble. I'm not trying to give Zelensky an out, but maybe,
it did. So it did, for sure. It may be a second, third, or fourth language. Look, I spoke Arabic pretty well in my day. I would never go to this kind of negotiation without an interpreter, for sure, especially with people who are speaking their native language. So you see it when he gets in a bind later. What happens when you get in fight or flight is our cognitive capabilities go away. We start going into what I call cat brain or responsive brain, and that's what happens. And then you forget all that language skill that you have in a foreign language. So when he was saying things in idiom like cards, you don't have the right cards. He has no concept what he's even talking about. He's like, I'm not playing cards. He doesn't get the allegory or the reference because his brain is not working correctly, and he's losing that language ability.
Interesting. All right, hang with me 1 second, Greg. We have President Trump getting off of Air Force One and coming down the steps. He navigates those steps much better than Joe Biden does, navigates meetings with world leaders better than Joe Biden does, navigates running a country better than Joe Biden does, and comes down the steps of Air Force One much better. And there he is. I assume he's going to get right into his motorcade, which it looks like he is, and off he goes. All right, one more clip for you, Greg, as we watch President Trump take off to Mar-a-Lago. This is him. You mentioned about the cards, and that set President Trump off a little bit. Cut 5.
And he happens to be right about
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
But right now, you don't.
I'm
Yeah,
very
you're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
of the
of
world.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War III.
What are you
You're
thinking about?
gambling with
What are you
World
thinking
War
about?
III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
Honestly, Greg, my 15-year-old son tries to talk over me like that when I'm telling him how it's going to be, and nothing makes me angrier. That's when I look at Zelensky acting like a child, a spoiled child.
He came to argue, and I guarantee if you push him in an argument, you get him into a position, he's got his points he wants to make. There's a really good lesson for you here. I call it no public displays of stupidity. When you're talking to somebody who's your superior at work, who has the upper hand, don't get into a shouting match with them at work. All you're going to do is piss them off and take away their thinking brain. There's a way to calm that down. I usually will say, hey, I can tell you're upset. Can we calm this down and go somewhere else? All it would have taken anywhere in this from anybody was to say, we'll just debate these points behind closed doors and give you an answer when we come back out for our presser. But it didn't happen.
Yeah. And I think Zelensky wanted to try to do this in front of the cameras, and it backfired bad on him. It's funny. He said, don't look stupid in front of bosses. I tell my son all the time, the 15-year-old, I said, there are such things as stupid questions. Don't ask them. So it's very different from what many parents tell their kids, but it is true. Greg Hartley, it is great having you on. This was a fun one today. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right, so Greg's website, in case you're interested, is readbodylanguage.com. That's readbodylanguage.com. Boy, I get a kick out of those segments. I really do. I'm glad you hung around for it. I don't always re-air Real America's Voice segments. Sometimes I do, but that one was worth going through with everything that's been happening. Hey, folks, before I let you go, and I want to play one clip, too, by the way, of Boston Mayor. You're not going to believe who she's apologizing to. I'll play that for you here in just a minute. But before I do, remember my friends at the Wellness Company, twc.health/grant, twc.health/grant. Use the promo code GRANT for 10% off. This is one of the kits. 8 very popular, much needed prescription medications, antivirals, antiparasitics, antibiotics, including ivermectin in this kit, a guidebook in how to use these medications. 10% off if you use the promo code GRANT, twc.health/grant. And here's the thing. I have food. I got like a Patriot Supply deal. I've got ammunition, like thousands of rounds. I've got water, and I've got power supply. Up until my association with TWC, I did not have prescription medications. And I now realize how important that is, not only with the shortage of prescription medications that are out there, but also natural disasters, possible terror attacks. The drugstore pharmaceutical system is very, very fragile. So I urge you, get one of these kits. It may save a life. You, your child, a family member, get one on hand. twc.health/grant. Use the promo code GRANT. If you pride yourself on being prepared, get yourself a Wellness Company medical kit with those prescription medications in them. twc.health/grant. Use the promo code GRANT. All right, the Boston mayor, apparently over the weekend, a knife-wielding lunatic takes to the streets. Police show up, shoot and kill the knife-wielding lunatic. And who does the mayor apologize to?
My condolences and all of our thoughts are with the family of the individual whose life has been lost.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the family and friends of the individual who's been lost.
So our condolences go to the individual who was killed tonight.
What? It's not just the mayor, the district attorney as well. Condolences to the individual who tried to kill multiple people in the streets of Boston at Copley Square, however you say it. This is the left's war on police, veiled as somehow sympathy for a deranged lunatic. This is about giving a backhanded slam to cops. So we're going to talk about this on the Real America's Voice show tonight. I got Joe Imperatrice, who's from Blue Lives Matter, to talk about what a slam. You know, it's hard enough for cops to do their job. It's hard enough for a cop to know he took somebody's life, even if it's a very bad person. But to have the district attorney and the mayor coming out and saying our thoughts and prayers are with the family of those who lost their life, a killer, a deranged lunatic, and that's who you're worried about? No. I'm worried about the people who are almost killed by this guy. So anyway, we'll talk about that tonight on the Real America's Voice show. Folks, you guys are great. That's going to do it for us today. Stinchfield's Army rolls. Thanks to all of you. If you would do me a favor, go to the website, grantstinchfield.com, grantstinchfield.com. Sign up for the email list there. It's how I stay in touch with you. God forbid we get canceled someplace. People go out of business. Websites go out of business. All this stuff. I need a way to stay in touch with you. The email list is the best way. I don't overload it. It's about an email a day I send, just one. GrantStinchfield.com, GrantStinchfield.com. Super helpful if you do that. Share the video today. If you're on Rumble, copy the link. Share it on all your social media platforms. Like it. Subscribe to the channel. Download the Rumble app. All of these things are really helpful. And to those of you on Getter and Facebook and YouTube, thank you for watching there. The Getter chat, very quiet today. No Getter chat at all. Facebook chat, hopping as usual. Thank you. As we had a high, I think this is a recent high, of 75 people in the Facebook Live. That is a recent high. Not as high as we were when we were rocking and rolling before Facebook demonetized me, but we're slowly making back inroads on Facebook. Rumble, always doing great. You know that's my home of homes when it comes to this stuff, so thank you all for watching there. All right, as I mentioned, Stinchfield's Army rolls. We'll see you on the Real America's Voice show tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time.